All right, so come back. It's my pleasure. I'm very excited to introduce Jackson Lautier as he introduces us about contractual return on investment for players in the NBA. Take it away.
All right, thanks again, and certainly thank you to the conference organizers for the chance to share my work. So this is in the early stages, so it'd be great to have some questions, feedback at the end. And again, to motivate this a little bit, you look at the NBA, it's a salary cap league, right? So basically, what that means is the amount you can pay the players on the court is restricted. So it's in your interest to effectively allocate how much player salary you can use. It's detrimental to be paying a lot of money for a player who is unable to perform because there's an opportunity cost. That's the economics word. So despite what I think would be a natural question, there's not a lot of research on how did a player perform over the life of their contract. So this is something you'd see in like finance, different investments. There's a lot of work on trying to explain how a player got their salary, but nothing that really tries to measure it. So that's the goal today. And to kind of give you the end of the paper first, where we're going, this is really about the overall framework. And the goal is to take what a player is doing on the court, right, making baskets, collecting rebounds, into a series of cash flows. Because once you have a series of cash flows, then you're in the finance world and you can perform your traditional ROI calculations. So it's roughly a 5-step process. First, you need to pick a measurement time horizon. So we're going to be using one NBA regular season, just as kind of an intuitive starting point. But that's first. Second, this is a little bit new. This is where I have a new metric, a little bit more on the illustrative side. But the point is, try to allocate what a player did in one game on a percentage basis. So we'll talk more about that. But once you have that percentage, the next step is try to estimate the dollar value of one game. So again, we'll talk about that. I've erred on the side of illustrative, but the point being, once you have a dollar value of the game, once you have a percentage contribution from each player, you're kind of allocating that piece of the pie to each player, and you're turning what they did on the court into a cash flow. And once you do that, you'll have a series of cash flows over one regular season. You use the player's salary as the initial investment, and then bang, you can perform your ROI calculations. So we'll be hitting on each of these a little bit, and then we'll talk about some results from the previous season. So first up is this idea of a game contribution percentage. And this is a quote unquote new metric. And I think, I don't have to spend a lot of time convincing you that one game is maybe the most important unit of measurement, right? You play to win the game, as the quote is. So we're going to focus on a single game. And then I think this middle point is very important and kind of unique a little bit to this work, is that I'm treating a regular season, think of the player's initial salary as like an amount you would loan to them. And then in exchange to pay off that loan, this player owes, quote unquote, 82 games. So think of each of those games as like a debt payment. So if you miss a game for whatever reason, I'm treating that as a default. So that's like a missed payment. So that's going to affect your return. So I think this point is kind of unique to this work. And then just mention quickly, instead of my game contribution percentage, you could use a game score. I do use some of the newer data, and within the game score, there is like a hard-coded coefficient, which I'm just a little bit averse to from my background, but you could certainly use another metric if you prefer. And then finally, game-by-game needs is what I'm looking for. So I want effectively a metric that does this, right? So I'll give you the goal first, where let's say we're the Celtics, right? We're looking at Jason Tatum. They just finished a game. My game contribution percentage for Jason Tatum, I want it to be all the stuff Jason Tatum did divided by all the stuff the Celtics did, right? So how big of a percentage did Jason Tatum contribute to what the team did on the floor? Now, there's a few things that are a little bit different. First of all, I want you to think more in terms of a usage rate rather than win shares. I'm not focused on contributing to winning. I'm just contributing to the overall game. And the reason I say this is whether a team wins or loses, those players collect their salary. So you're paying for what happens on the floor no matter what. So that's something we can talk more about at the end, but it's just how much did that player do on the floor? And then importantly, I think it's pretty obvious from this basic fraction, but if Tatum doesn't play, then his contribution for that game is a 0. And then lastly here, pretty apparent again by this definition that if you add up the game contribution for all the players on the Celtics within the game, you're going to get 1. And that's going to be true for the winning and losing team. And this kind of makes standardization a little bit easier, where you just kind of compare one game to one game. A little more detail, right, for the sake of time, can't really dive into this, but for my game contribution percentage, I'm using 37 fields from player tracking data. There's a big table in the reference that gives a lot of detail. Some of these abbreviations are mine, some you might recognize. And what I would just say quickly is you could certainly ask the question, Jackson, why these 37 fields? I tried to come up with a set of principles first, and then from these principles, pick different fields to use. We can certainly quibble about this. Some of these, like no double counting, that's from like economics. And some of these I try to make more related to basketball, but we can talk more about this at the end. But these are, the fields I selected, and I give more detail about why in the paper. So suppose that we agree on the number of fields that should be in there. The method I'm using is, there's a lot of symbols here, but it's actually pretty simple. Think about each different field. So maybe take like drives to the basket. That's one of the 37 fields. Each team is going to have a total number of drives, and then each player is going to have their own number of drives. So that fraction is that player's contribution for drives, and then each one of the 37 fields is weighted. Now, originally, I was thinking about a sophisticated way to assign the weights, and then I wanted to keep the focus on the overall framework. So I'm actually using just like a uniform weighting system. Every field is getting its own weight. If you're Bayesian, you could think about that as like a uniform prior. And the one other small thing is just to make sure everything adds to 1 is that if there's a certain field that the team did not record anything, like maybe defensive loose balls recovered, the Celtics didn't have any, then that field drops out from the calculation, and each weight is 1 over the number of the 37 fields that are not 0. And again, that's just to make sure everything sums to unity. So this is really it, right? It's just trying to count how much happened and then assign fractional credit to each player. So once you've calculated this, assuming you have your contribution percentage, the next is you got to estimate the dollar value of a single game. Again, you could go crazy with this. For illustrative purposes, I decided to err on the side of simplicity. And all I'm doing is taking the total salary for every single active player on a roster for the regular season. That's a fancy S here. And then just dividing it by the total number of games, 1230, and then divide again by 2 because there's 2 teams within each game. So roughly speaking, this is what each team is paying for each game based on the total player salary. So how do you get your cash flow? Well, you multiply the single game value by the game contribution percentage for that individual player for that game, and then this is how you get the cash flow that you would allocate to one player. So once you have this cash flow, you end up in a finance world. So this is kind of a finance 101 where you have a cash flow stream. Cash flow 0, this is like negative. This is your initial investment. This is what the investment is paying off. And your rate of return is just this rate R such that your initial investment equals the present value of your future investments. So if you translate this to what we've done, you take the player's salary, that's their initial cash flow, you multiply it by a single game value, so the player's cash flow, right, game contribution percentage times the single game value, and then you're solving for this rate R, and that's the player's return on investment for the regular season. So big N would be 82 in this instance. So that's really it. Takes a little bit of effort to get here, but then once you do, I think there's some neat stuff to look at. So that's what we'll do now. So what do the results look like? Well, I'm looking at data from the previous season. I would put a shout out to this great package, NBA API. That's a really nice engine. I needed my data to be game by game, so I had to write my own query around that. But this was super helpful. Get some player salary data from Hoops Hype. And then if you're interested, I do have a public GitHub. all my code, all the data is out there. If you want to reproduce this or dive into it, just please cite, this preprint if you do that. So we're looking at the previous NBA regular season. First thing I want to do is just look at game contribution percentage. Let's do a sniff test. Is this metric even reasonable based on how I've defined it? So by my estimation, there was just shy of 26,000 non-zero game contribution percentages. Here's the histogram. You can see that most players contribute right around 10%, give or take. And then there's this right skew. And the highest one was actually Luka Doncic. It was the game he had 60 points, 20 rebounds, and 10 assists against my New York Knicks. That was about 33%. One nice thing about this, kind of a happy coincidence, is in the NBA, the maximum player salary slot is between 30 and 35%. So I thought it was kind of nice that the maximum game contribution percentage kind of aligned with that. I wasn't going for that, but it's kind of a nice early sniff test. So this is sort of how the metric works, give you a sense of the distribution. Next thing I wanted to do is just look at what I'm calling a present value game contribution percentage. So this is no interest rate. It's just adding up what happens within each individual game, that fractional contribution for a whole season. And I wanted to compare my metric with like player efficiency rating, win shares, box score plus minus, value above replacement, and Raptor, some common metrics. And again, kind of a nice sniff test. I had Jokic at number 2. All the other metrics have Jokic at number 1. And I had Sabonis at the top. And I think the main reason is just, if you look here, Sabonis played 10 more games. And that's really, I think, something my metric is capturing. That, again, is just a little bit different than some of the other metrics. So I'll give you kind of a visual for that more. And this isn't to say, right, that these metrics are not as good. It's just sometimes it's nice to have a different point of view, and you kind of use all the metrics together to make a decision. And you can see like Embiid was number 3, Luka Doncic. So it has a nice early sniff test. You might raise an eyebrow at Vucevic, but he did play every single game. The other thing I would say is what I really like about the metric is it quantifies missed games. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's compare 2 players that by my metric had a very similar present value game contribution percentage, 11.8 for Anthony Davis, 11.8 for Brook Lopez. And if you look at the difference, Anthony Davis played about 56 games. So he had a big contribution in the games he did play, but there's a number of zeros here. Brook Lopez played 78 games. Maybe he didn't have the same big contribution percentage, but his consistent availability helped him achieve this like break even. And the only reason I illustrate this is there's a lot of like what feels to me some hand waving conversation about how many games one player did versus another. Here you can get the actual break even number, right? So it's just something that's a little bit different, and you can see like a player's whole cash flow stream, so to speak. This is if you bring in player salary, this is the kind of results here. Here's the top 10, bottom 10 based on last season. No real surprise here, right? Players who did not have a big salary but contributed a lot on the court had a nice return. Flip side is players who had a bigger salary but either through injury or for some reason did not play a lot. They're going to have your negative returns. This is minimum. You did have to play at least 25 games to be in this chart. And I would say the overall result, not that surprising, but this metric actually lets you rank all the players and gets you that ROI. One other thing that is of interest. So player salary in the NBA, very formulaic. It's really driven by the collective bargaining agreement. It's not quite a free market. So one thing you can do is, okay, let's take all the players who had 430 players, throw them on a scatter plot, look at salary by my estimate of return on investment. I think there's kind of a neat pattern here where players who make the most money have a hard time breaking even. Now, I think what's missing here is I'm only looking at the regular season. So I think a nice interpretation here might be that if you're one of these big time earners, you need to contribute in the playoffs to really get that break even. So one of the ways you could use this chart is you go to a certain salary scale and you might look at like an Evan Mobley. So he's at the top for players making just under 10 million. Compare that to a Landry Shamet and you can kind of get a relative value within certain salary scales. So this is another way to try to use this analysis. So I'll kind of conclude here and then open it up for questions. So this is what I think is really a first attempt to try to connect what's happening on the court and salary into this like retrospective ROI. I think there's hopefully some clear uses for this, like NBA teams, NBA player agents, and even award voters. If you want to forecast, just project on-court performance into this framework, and then you can kind of back solve for ROI if you're trying to decide how much to pay a player, so to speak. And then I think I definitely tried to err on the side of simplicity, so a lot of customization is still possible, right? We could change the fields for GCP. We could update the weights. You could use your own per game metric, just kind of plug and place within the metric. You could use like more precise timing within the cash flows, actual game dates. You could even weight games by importance. You can include playoff games, even include off-court revenue, like jersey sales, things like that. So by my estimate, I'm at the 15-minute mark. So I will stop here and can take any questions.
Thank you, Jackson, for that wonderful talk. Are there any questions? Feel free to either type them in the chat or just unmute yourself. While we're waiting for that, maybe I'll start with, I was wondering if you thought about maybe doing combinations of players to see the return on investment of like the first 2 players on the team, or 2 or 3, or even just whole lineups to see which lineups had the best return on investment over the course of the season.
So short answer to that is no, but I think it's a really interesting thought. You know, I kind of like this framework here is really trying to get this the first time, but I think you're right. I have the data set out there. I think that would be pretty neat to look at. You know, which combination of 5 players, certainly for a team's point of view, right? So I think that's something next. So nice thought, but I haven't done that yet. Well, I suppose generally just kind of at this level, but you could do by team as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions out there? Forgot to say this earlier, but maybe we should all think. Oh, here, you have a question. Go ahead.
So I noticed a lot of the top people in your stat were big men. Do you think that that's the trend of the NBA, or do you think that maybe this stat kind of favors big men that got a lot of rebounds?
I think it's a great question. It's something that you'll notice more so in the paper too. I suspect it's a little bit more driven by the fields available, because it does include things like, you know, contests at the rim, rebounds, you know, things like that. But I do also think there is kind of this long-standing basketball truism, which is just people who are big impact the game a lot. And I would also say I think there's a little bit of a skew of durability where players who are bigger tend to get hurt less. So I think it's a little bit more weighed by the total games is where you really accumulate this metric. But I did notice that as well, that it could be an artifact of the fields I'm using. So I don't know if it's something overall. It also might say that if you're paying your center a lot of money, maybe you could, you know, use that money more effectively if you can get the same value from kind of a cheaper center. So maybe that's something you could look at too.
You're muted, Eric.
Okay. Yeah. So let's all thank Jackson one more time, and then I think we have to move on to the next talk. But thank you again. That was really interesting. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
Next up, is it Amrit?
Yeah, hello. Let me quickly change my camera real quick. Sorry. Yeah, you guys see me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry everyone. I'm in like some other event currently, so it's like not the greatest setting, but yeah, I'll start presenting my work.
Are you able to share screen?
Yeah, does this look good?
Yep, I can see that perfectly.
Okay, yeah.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Amrit Vignesh. He's telling us about a comparison between machine learning and logistic regression models predicting MBA, MVP using different types of.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining into this. So my name is Amrit. I'm a high schooler based in Central Florida, and essentially what my project is about predicting the NBA MVP winner, where I use different types of models which have different statistical inputs. And just as a reminder, I just realized that some of these slides have like some unnecessary transitions, which I use because I use a template, so it may be a little bit weird, but should go through that. So yeah, so the most valuable player award in the National Basketball Association is basically given the best performing player in the regular season. However, there isn't really a lot of objectivity in this. The award is usually voted on by journalists and other fans. So there is that subjectivity, which is essentially what I'm going to be exploring in this presentation. There are many factors of subjectivity it can have. One is called voter fatigue. And a good example, which I'll explain later, which I'll just reference, is Nikola Jokic. He won 2021 and 2022, but a lot of people were tired of him keep winning. And this may have led to Embiid's win instead of Jokic. So that is one factor of subjectivity. Also, the city market in the 2023 season, the Philadelphia market is much bigger than the Denver market, and that could be a factor. There are a lot of media narratives that go around, sometimes supporting a certain player. And also there may be some sociological factors. Now, this has been dismissed by a lot of research, but there always is some type of inherent bias that can be present. So predictive analytics uses can be like benefiting multiple parties. You have coaches who the data analysts for team can like extract insights and they can help the coaches create strategies and tactics, which can be statistically objective essentially. The media can also start using more statistics when they're making their debates and takes, which can also help their reputation. And then bettors can be making more reliable bets, which could maximize their benefit. So essentially what the purpose of the study is, I'm going to be predicting the NBA MVP of the 2022 to 23 season, which I made this research, of course, after that happened. So it's almost like I'm going to be comparing it, and I'm going to be using different statistical models from a range of training data to compare like from the actual result. So essentially the statistical techniques I'll be utilizing is I'm going to be training data from 1980 to 2022 to predict 2023. And also I'll be using logistic regression. So that's where I'm going to be indicating the MVP variable in that trained data as 1 or 0. So every MVP in that time frame, if they won, they'll get getting a 1, while everyone else will be getting a 0. So how did I create my methodology? And just as reference, I use the R language. Obviously, there's a lot of other statistical computing languages that can be utilized. So what I did is I used RStudio, like I said, and I imported libraries like NBA StatR, which is one of the most popular libraries for NBA analysis. And I used some scrape functions. This includes bref player stats, which is essentially based around basketball reference. So it's almost like a library import stat function, those stats. And also I'm using the game logs function, which tells the game log. So here are the 3 models which okay, sorry, this should be okay. So yeah, this is where like the weird transition comes. So the basic stats model is where I'm going to be only using statistics that can be easily derived from box score watching. Some basic stats I'll show in the next slide, but obvious ones include like points per game, assists per game, etc. Advanced stats are usually ones where you can like use it as accumulation of basic stats, or they can be derived from models created by famous analysts. One that's very popular is player efficiency rating, or even I didn't use it in my model, but like true shooting percentage for shooting efficiency. And then the combined statistics, that's basically where I'm going to be applying both of these type of statistics in the model. And this actually matters when you're doing future predictive model. And actually, I did start creating a model, which is not in this research, but it predicts the current season. So like Basketball Reference has their own MVP tracker. I did a very similar thing where I kind of changed the train data to be 1980 to 2023, predicting the current 2024 season essentially. So here are some basic statistics. You have points per game, assists per game, rebounds per game, steals per game, block per game, and individual wins. So these are ones I'll be implementing. Sorry. And then advanced statistics include player efficiency rating, win shares per 48, block plus minus, and value over replacement player. So these ones I'll be including as well in my model. So here's the filtering that I'll be doing. So the player to be considered in the MVP models must have played at least 41 games. Now, 41 games is a very arbitrary value because there was no MVP criteria for the NBA until this current season, where now they're requiring at least 65 games of 20 minutes. So 41 games I kind of designate because it is at least 50% of the games in most seasons. Now we have had some lockout seasons like the 2011 to 12 season, I believe 98 to 99 season, but I didn't basically even go like I should have. Some people would think like maybe I should have still like made like a percentage of 50% rather than 41 games. I still think that 41 games is like a good like margin because I don't want it to be like way too of a sample size essentially. And so this is the explanation of logistic regression. So in my two models here, I have the basic model and the advanced model. So this Y value is essentially representing like a linear regression form where I'm including all of the variables and like in addition with like their beta coefficient. And then it'll be implemented into this one on the right where it says L of Y is equal to 1 over 1 plus e to the Y. And that kind of generates the graph to the left. And the reason it's used for this model is because I have the binary variable MVP 1 or 0. So obviously, if you can see, you have 1, which is like, if you like make kind of like, I didn't do it, but if you make like kind of like bounds to the logistic regression graph, you're going to have 1 and 0. And most of the values will be in that. So some insights we can derive. We can derive, do the models have decent training accuracy? We can also see what statistics predict the MVP to a large extent. Will it be basic or advanced stats? We can see kind of with a little bit of subject, like the discussion, we can see what factors of subjectivity are demonstrated, and we can see how these models, can benefit various industries. Like I talked about the coaches, media, and the bettors. So we're going to be looking at some results. So was the NBA MVP predicted properly for the 2022-23 season? That's our question. So first, let's look at some of the significance of the statistics. So this is what RStudio outputs when you use the summary function. And essentially, most of this I would ignore. I would just look at the right when it shows the stars. So the stars show significance level. The more stars, you're going to have lower significance, lower a p-value, which is going to have higher statistical significance, which is important. So as you can see here, we're going to ignore the intercept, but in the basic stats, it looks like that points per game, assists per game, rebounds per game, and individual wins are highly significant. And that would make sense. I mean, if you think about MVP journalists, a lot of times when they look at just the baseline stats, they would see like these first three stats, and they would also check how many wins the season has. So this kind of reflects the normal value you would think how a MVP journalist kind of votes. And for the advanced stats, there's a little bit less. So there was only 4 advanced stats. And as you can see here, win shares per 48 was the most significant. And this also kind of makes sense because win shares per 48 is kind of directly correlated to the amount of team wins because it's almost like how many wins you're contributing. So it's kind of related. And then VORP, which is value over replacement player. And that also, I guess, it also can be very important because it kind of tells like your individual contribution on the court. But I guess it's not like, so I kind of like discuss this a little bit later, but we kind of like can see like how are journalists comparing basic and advanced stats when they're evaluating the MVP potential of the player. Now, when I look at this in a combined model where I include all statistics, you could see that actually it's a little interesting. The assists per game and the individual wins were most significant. I kind of expected individual wins, but assists per game being significant was a little surprising to me. And also it's then followed by points per game and rebounds per game. But as you notice, none of these advanced statistics even have significance close to those of the basic statistics. This can tell us some very important information on how MVP journalists use statistics when evaluating a player. So here are my predictions. So using just basic statistics, it looks like that Giannis Antetokounmpo is predicted to be the MVP, followed closely by Nikola Jokic. But our actual winner, Joel Embiid, is only 4th in this ranking, which is interesting. He's not even top 3 here. If you look at advanced statistics, once again, Nikola Jokic now has an overwhelming MVP probability, and it looks like Joel Embiid is 3rd. I mean, once again, he's not even top 2 here, so it's very interesting to see that. And then once again, when you use the combined statistics, which this is really the model that matters, you can see that Nikola Jokic is 1st, Giannis is 2nd, and you have Embiid 3rd. So Embiid, apparently, if you just use statistical performance, he shouldn't have been top 2 in the MVP voting, yet he still won the MVP in the end. As you can see, probably these top 6 were probably what most NBA fans thought were like the best players these seasons. Maybe Sabonis, people will probably thought like a little bit lower, but that's essentially how it is. So now the models predicted Joel Embiid. Surprising. So if I look at my training accuracy, oh, sorry. If I look at my training accuracies, the basic stats model had 74% of the training data seasons predicted the MVP properly. The advanced stats model only had 61% predicting the MVP properly, and the combined stats model had 74% of the training data predicted properly. So as you can see, the basic statistics and the combined statistics were the most important, followed by the advanced in terms of predicting in terms of the models predicting the MVP properly. So here's my discussion and conclusion. So as you can see, all three models, when you look at it, they exhibited at least 3 of every 5 MVPs being predicted properly. We saw that with it was 74%, 61%, 74%, so at least 3/5. An example of some of the models not showing the proper prediction was with here in the right one, where you have Allen Iverson predicted to be 6 in the 2001 season when you use the combined model. But on the left with the combined model, LeBron was overwhelmingly supposed to win in 2009. So here's some statistical significance. It looks like the basic stats are much more significant in predicting the MVP when combined. So media analysts, this kind of can tell us that media analysts really do not really pay attention to advanced statistics because it's like they kind of don't really, because they're not data analysts. They're mostly like journalists and fans and like you media analysts. They're not really like going to be looking at the specific of how a player performed in terms of their advanced stats. They'll just look at the very simple stats, like I said, points per game, assists per game, rebounds per game, their wins. They're going to be looking at that. But either way, it makes sense that the advanced stats model on its own had the lower training accuracy because advanced stats on its own should never be used to evaluate a player because on its own, it doesn't really illustrate the whole story. Jimmy Butler second would not probably make sense to a lot of people in the regular season, but that's what the advanced stats model told us. Some subjectivity, once I guess said, like in the beginning, Jokic may have been taxed because of the fact that there was voter fatigue, where he already won the previous 2 seasons, and you had Philadelphia being a larger market than Denver, which could lead to a larger sample size of MVP voters. Some limitations, of course, I said like 41 games is an arbitrary value, but even if the like 41 games like included players who were like inconsistently present, because 41 games may seem a little bit low, but if a player played 42 games, they're probably going to have a negligible probability. Usually the best players play most of the season, disregarding injuries. And of course, I did not like reliability, like I didn't use reliability to perform like on the selection of metrics. Like I didn't really like say this metric should be used because it's more reliable quantitatively. I just kind of like thought about availability, and if these metrics described multiple aspects of the game, they were included. Also, I try not to include duplicates to a good extent. And yes, that's the explanation of those. So some benefits. You can place accurate bets now. If I use the model applied to the current season, coaches can investigate performance, which can help with roles on the court, and the media can start using statistics to analyze the MVP race rather than using their subjective narratives, and they can start being more reliable and maybe appealing to most viewers because I think viewers like using statistics like the basic ones, not really advanced ones, but at least they'll appeal to them in some way. So I basically create a current season MVP model, which is not included in this, but I'm going to be including my socials in the end where I kind of like market it out. But essentially, in the current model, I did include the new criteria of 65 games with at least 20 minutes. I changed the regression model to include 2023 within the train data. So now it's 1982, 2023. I started like updating the model. Like the model is only going to be updated on the next morning of a game day because Basketball Reference needs to make sure it updates just to be safe. I'm an intern for the Hall of Fame Fund and Hoplitics, which is a popular accounts on Twitter or X as an intern, and I'm using this. Basically, I'm giving this information for them to post on their account. But what I want to do is I'm going to start creating a website which is going to be updating these award probabilities for different sports every morning, kind of like how Basketball Reference has with their MVP predictor. And I started doing this. I also made a similar model for the NFL MVP and the MLB Cy Young. So those are things I also have on there. Here's my works cited. If you want to check out, this is the GitHub link. I can maybe keep this up for a bit, or I'll just so like if you go to like github.com/Vignesh, my name, then you can see all my repositories there. And here's some of my socials, which you guys can follow. I'm very active on LinkedIn, started being a little bit more active on X, and I post a lot of my projects to Medium. So thank you. So, and I'm open to questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's all thank Amrit again. And then are there any questions?
So I was just kind of curious on, the choice of logistic regression, like you mentioned, you're labeling ones and zeros as your output. Um, did you like how many players were in your training data? Like, did you see a lot of imbalance there? Because obviously there's only one winner per year. I was just kind of curious on the distribution of ones and zeros in your training data.
Yeah, so obviously, like there would from the 1980 to 2022 train data, there would be only 43 ones, but every player who was eligible, like get like they met that 41 games criteria, would have been included in the model. And that kind of relates to I could have also done it with another method where I instead used like rankings based on their MVP, but obviously like that also like kind of made because like not every player, of course, was like even like ranked for the MVP. Like obviously some random player who played like 41 games as a role player would not have been included. So that's kind of why I use logistic regression to indicate as one or zero. I could have definitely like made the criteria a little bit more like smaller. So like it's only like maybe they have to play at least 65 games or something, like using the current criteria. And that would have maybe made more of a balance between the one and zero. But yeah, that's kind of what I did.
Yeah, I mean, just through personal experience, if you have very imbalanced data, I think it can be a difficult thing to predict. So if, you know, I wasn't sure if you looked at like metrics like precision or recall, through your confusion matrix from like other than accuracy, perhaps.
Yeah, no, yeah, so I didn't really look at anything other than accuracy. This was one of like the first projects I did, so I was not really
Sure.
familiar with a lot of this. I also derived a lot of this methodology from an NFL MVP paper, which I saw where it predicted for quarterbacks. So I kind of used very similar where they did like the one in zero. But definitely a good thing I can look at for the future.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think we might have time for one more question. Anybody have any? Not, maybe you could ask during a break. So thank you again, Amrit. Let's all give them a virtual thank you, and then we can set up for this last.
Thank you all for letting me join this. Thank you.
Oh no, it was a pleasure. Thank you. So we got about a minute for the next. So Eugene, are you here?
Yes.
Can I ask how you say your last name?
Tulyagijja.
Tulyagijja?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
Let me share my
And
screen. You see my slides fine?
I can, yeah.
Okay,
but I'm
perfect.
seeing the
Oh, like the
like I think
okay.
not seeing it full screen.
Okay, give me a second.
Mhm.
What about now?
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so I think it's about time to start. So I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and say it's a pleasure to introduce Eugene Tulyagijja from Syracuse University, who's going to be talking about using computer vision to determine the perfect jump shot. Take it away.
Hey, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this conference. I hope everyone's doing well. Again, my name is Eugene Tulyagijja. I'm a junior studying sports analytics at Syracuse University. Today, I'm presenting a project using computer vision to determine the perfect jump shot. The reason I started with this project is I'm a person who loves sports my entire life, especially basketball. And if you watch basketball, you played basketball, you know the jump shot is one of the most important part of the game. Having a good jump shot can determine if you make it to the league or have multiple contracts in the league. You can be worth 7 to 8, 9 figures if you have a great jump shot. So myself playing basketball, I always struggled to shoot. So either I decided I could either spend a lot of time in the gym or like many of us do in class or at work, use AI to solve my problems. So I went with the AI route. So what is computer vision? A computer vision is a type of machine learning technique or an artificial intelligence, which takes a video input of something and breaks it down. You classify stuff, then you have an output based on a supervised or unsupervised learning technique. In my case, I'm using a supervised learning technique. In my case, the input was game film from the past 3 seasons. So since the 2020 NBA season, Then we break down to the feature extraction part, where we broke down each body part of the NBA player to tell what part of the body, what type of input is the most impactful to the output, which is a make or a miss. That's where the classification come in, where it links perfect with the feature extraction part. So like for your base or your legs would link perfectly with your hips, for example. So the input, where did I get all the game film? So I work for the Syracuse men's basketball team as a data analyst. I was able to have access to Synergy. This is where I can access pretty much game film from any period of time, which I got lucky with. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall, but I was able to get lucky with this. I was able to download all the game film, which led me to the methodology part, where I would able to extract the feature and classify and use the computer to its advantage. So if you look at the left screen where Minnesota is playing Denver, you can see on the on each player's box, you can see a box where if you have the ball is green and the player defending the ball is purple, everything else is red and yellow. As you can see, the defender who's on defense is yellow, and whoever is on offense is going to be red. This is how the computer first recognizes who is who and what motion it is. On the left side, like the top left of the screen, you can see like the 99 cont V or whatever. If you go down to the bottom, loading weight from basic is when the computer realizes someone is taking a jump shot, which takes me to the picture of Steph Curry to the right here, is how the computer maps how the players shoot. If you look at each circle part, that is like the focal point of how we break down each body part, and whatever line it is like the exoskeleton of the player that the computer recognizes. So to make it easier to understand, this is how we classify and the output of the players. So this is a perfect jump shot, which is isolated by each biomechanic. I'm going to go in to explain what each biomechanic means in this case and how I broke it down. So for the base and the legs, this is not how you align to the rim per se. This is more how much your knee bends and like when you should release the ball on the top of your jump, which you can see has like the highest importance. But if you look at the 3-point percentage for this, you're around league average, because again, this is where the power is generated from, like building a building. The most important part is the base. The shoulder alignment pretty much means whatever, if you're a right-handed shooter, your right shoulder right here is aligned perfectly to the rim. Your left shoulder is aligned perfectly to the rim if you're a left-handed shooter as well. And if you have this, your field goal percentage is way above league average. Same with your 3-point percentage. You're around where Steph Curry shoots. And for something important in this too, for Steph, for example, for shoulder alignment, the computer's only taking into account all the shots that he has his shoulder aligned to the rim, and eliminates every make or miss that his shoulders are not. So those are like the outliers in the data that I eliminated like through a supervised learning technique. Then your hip alignment is when this is where the mechanics is linked together. So your hips at the top of your jump, you want your hips to be aligned to the rim to create like the perfect alignment per se. Your release angle and your elbow angle is the perfect classification, the same too. So where your release angle wants to be is at 40, where your elbow angle wants to be is at 90 degrees here, which means you will have the perfect release angle when you do release the ball to attack the rim, where the ball will fall perfectly in the middle of the hoop, which will give you the highest chance of the ball going in, which some players call it like the perfect swish. That is at a 53-degree angle when you release the ball, so it falls perfectly down. The dominant arm angle links again to the shoulder alignment, but has 8% less importance. Your dominant arm angle is literally where you want the ball to start with your dominant hand. So your right arm, wants to be aligned with your shoulder and linked straight towards the rim. Same with your left hand, vice versa. An offhand, what that means is if you're a right-handed shooter, your offhand would be your left hand. You pretty much just want the ball, you just want to guide the ball up so that when your release arm just pretty much just twists like the ball, so it just perfectly swishes into the rim. As you can see, most of the percentage here is above league average. Mind you, this is again to take into account because the data is only from makes and misses if all this is perfect. So the result of the perfect jump shooter in the NBA, which is the highest percentage isolated by each body part. So Klay Thompson has the perfect base according to the past 3 years. Buddy Hield has the best shoulder alignment. So That means, again, his shoulder's perfectly aligned to the rim. When I said release angle and elbow angle is perfectly correlated, Steph Curry has the best arc attacking into the rim in the NBA. That's why he makes sense for this one. Damian Lillard at the top of his jump always perfectly aligns his hips to the rim most of the time. It's probably the better term. Kyrie Irving is the offhand. I was able to create a simulation for this too, just to test out my theory. If we were to combine all this body part together to see how well the player would shoot. So the player would shoot 62% from the field and 48% from three-pointer, which is, if I go back to my other slide, it's well above league average in both. And if you shoot 48% from three, you are probably going to go down as the greatest shooter of all time. So if you have kids or any friends who like basketball, maybe take a screenshot of this and make them learn how to do each aspect of this. And when I started my project, one of the most important part was, how do I impact this to a player, or how do I impact this to someone who actually plays basketball at the highest level? Over summer, I got the opportunity to work with a few NBA players, and here's the results for that. So I talked to them, unable to like put their name on this, but he's a rookie in the league right now. So if you see the left side, you can see his college stats from last year and his shot charts. You can see on the left, he struggles from the left wing, shooting 29%, which again is well below league average. And at the top, the key, he struggles shooting at 18%. This player is known to be an athletic specimen, and he is known to attack the rim more than actually shoot. So the summer improvements we've had, we tracked stats before and after we did any changes to his jump shot. Right before his change, he was shooting 60% every time we practiced. After, he shot 8% better at 76. As you can see from the paint, which is below 15 feet or above 15 feet, there's not much of the difference, which makes sense just because you're already shooting at a 90% clip. There's not going to be that much correlation. Plus, most of the time, you're not shooting a jump shot from that range. But where you start to see some changes in the mid-range game, where he improved 3%. And if you look at the three-pointer, this is where you saw the most drastic change. And this is where it's probably the most important, because we were trying to work on that the most. He increases three-point percentage by 8% from practice data. But you might ask me, hey, these are all NBA players. They might just get better shooting over time. How does this affect me if I want to be a better shooter playing basketball? So as I mentioned at the beginning, I wasn't the best shooter ever. So having access to different pickup games, I got a graduate assistant to start tracking my stats, and I tested all of that theory on myself. So if you look to the left side here, this is before the changes. So this was this time last year before I implemented anything. Overall, I shot 32% from the field, 25% from mid-range, below 46% from 15 feet or above. I shot pretty horrendous from the three-point line too, 24%. Then I realized after doing this research, my release angle is always so flat. So I started fixing that, and my jump shot, I don't really jump for some reason. So I started doing that more. Then you can look to the right. This is the pass from this from the past 3 months of playing basketball. I was able to track my stats that I've shot 58% from the field, 50% from mid-range, even though I've taken less. And the most important part is I've increased 33% from 33% from three-point percentage at the same amount of clip. So I went from 24% to 57%, which honestly, this leads me to believing that this AI thing that I kind of made has like a positive correlation to NBA players and someone like me, which again, that's like the conclusion. So if you want to reach out to me, learn more about this, here's my email, here's my social. I post stuff on Twitter all the time. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll open the floor up for questions.
So I'll thank our speaker again. And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I can start it off and ask, are you planning on making this available for younger athletes, maybe to practice on their own?
Yes. So again, I mentioned I work with basketball here at Syracuse. So I've been talking with the coaches to see like if we have some players that need to improve their jump shot. So we're trying to work it with them first and see what the impact is. I mean, I'm only tested out with like a few NBA guys and like myself as a joke, kinda. But hopefully in the future, I'm able to help with younger athletes, because I feel like if we're able to implement some of these techniques at a young age and show them like, hey, this is the players that's performing at the highest level. I feel like this would be a great way for them to start.
Yeah, so I think that could be really powerful for students that maybe, or for young kids that don't, it's great coaches.
Yeah, for
Quickly
sure.
identify, I guess, the difference between their shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat from Alan. It says there's an older book on the physics of basketball that you might find helpful. Put a link to it.
Yeah, I got that. That sounds awesome. I might look at that.
Somebody else have any questions?
Hey, Eugene. Yeah, this is Justin. Great
Hey,
talk.
Justin.
I was wondering, did you use open pose for this? And in that case, is it 2-dimension or 3 dimensions for the poses?
3-dimension, actually.
Is that actually using open pose, or is that Facebook's 3D pose?
It's Facebook's like 3D pose.
Yeah, okay. I've been using that as well. It's
Yeah,
a really,
it's been-
really nice library.
Yeah, it's
Well,
awesome.
great talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you. Yeah, I saw Tom's question. He asked, do you find any NBA players who are usually a good shooter but have unusual alignment or angles? Yes, I did. Tyrese Halliburton has one of the most odd jump shot and has I don't think he has anything that correlates to any of this at all. His shoulder alignment's always off, and then his release angle is not the best. But he's like a 40% shooter from the three, so he's one of the biggest outliers we have.
Hi, Eugene. I really enjoyed your talk. This is Shane Sanders. I was wondering if you were going to workshop a jump shot using this data and trying to help a player become better, would you do it marginally? Like if you, like a player has a lot of like maybe 3 areas of deficiency, would you say you need to improve this, this, and this, and then workshop all 3 at the same time? Or would you go after one, then another, and then another?
Yep. So I've tried going one by one. So what I did with like the college players I'm working with right now and some NBA guys is pretty much just what I do is I film their jump shot from each spot from like, so if I go back to this, you can see he struggles from the left wing in the top of the key. So what I did was I filmed 100 jump shots from each spot, then let the computer like break it down to where to see like how much he's off by, like how much his angles are off by from like the angles that you should be at, then work from each spot at a time. We worked from closer range just because we worked from closer to the rim just to get the perfectly shot to be aligned, then move back out further and further to the 3-point line. That's why I highlighted this part before, just because we wanted to just get better at the basics before, because changing a jump shot takes time. Like biomechanics are not going to change that. So working spot by spot is probably the most effective way that I've done it before, but I haven't tried doing it all at once before because I feel like the player sometimes gets overwhelmed. And then there's a human dynamics to all of this too. Telling like a person that they're not a good shooter and you should fix this it's a hard conversation to do as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I also wonder, did you maybe you like kind of control for off the catch versus off the dribble? Because sometimes you might want to get your shot off the dribble, so you might have a smaller window rather than someone passes to you and you have open space. Does that affect like your optimal alignment and et cetera? Maybe off the dribble.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it does actually. But this whole like research is pretty much based on everything. I haven't got to the part of like isolating its shot mechanics yet, because from a post-up situation, a fadeaway will require different just thinking about it now would require a different set of mechanics compared to a shot that's further from the basket. So right now, to improve this, actually, I'm working on something different where I'm just studying Damian Lillard and Steph Curry. They're the 2 guys that shoot from way above like the 3-point line. And I've like so far what the computer and I have noticed from just watching film is just that they're bend their knees more, their base is lower, and their jump shot like from a higher set point it's actually lower, which kind of makes sense because they're generating more power from that way. But hopefully with more time, I'm able to just isolate each shot type. So off the dribble, catch and shoot, contested versus non-contested, fadeaways is something I'm working on too, and then shots from further and deeper.
Thanks very much. Really interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, we have time for more questions, but if there are none, maybe we can thank Eugene one more time.
Appreciate it again.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Have you looked at female? Wondering how
I have
Caitlin
not.
Clark compares.
I have not. As I said to Dr. Sanders earlier, I'm working on the every other jump shot like first, and I'll probably get to like WNBA because I kind of realized they have a different set of jump shots as well, but I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Cool. Well, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So I think up next is lunch. Everyone can go and enjoy a quick break and get some activity in.
Thanks, Eric. Good stuff here. Everything go pretty smoothly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a funny story to share with you later about sun came running in. Luckily, I was muted.
Just came running in the room screaming and yelling.
Well, downstairs yelling, "Dad, Dad, Dad!" I'm like, "You're not supposed to be back here."
Yeah. That's the worst thing that happens today. That's not the end of the world.
And luckily, I was muted. And
Yeah.
So.
I'm going to check on Michael, but yeah, otherwise we got 45 minutes. I'm just going to shut down the Zoom, and then this afternoon I'll get back on. Are you back for the afternoon, or are you going to go do other fun stuff?
And at some point, can't predict the schedule perfectly. I'm definitely gonna try and come back and watch.
Yeah. In other words, you'll do what you're told, but hopefully you'll be back.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I'm gonna go check on Michael, and then